They told me the job was easy. Just light cleaning, they said. 3 hours a night, no guests, no traffic. The pay? Twice the normal rate. I should have known something was wrong right then. The Briarwood Hotel sat on a ridge just outside town, its black silhouette cutting against the pale sky like a burnt tooth. Locals said it had been closed since 1993, after a boiler explosion in the basement killed half the staff. The owners never reopened, but apparently someone still wanted it kept tidy, or at least appeared tidy. When I met Mr. Keller, the man who hired me, he handed me an envelope and a list folded 3 times. "Your supplies are already inside," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Follow these rules exactly. I don't care if you think they're stupid. They aren't." He turned away before I could ask anything else. The rules. The paper smelled faintly like mildew. 9 short lines typed in fading ink. Arrive no earlier than 9 p.m. and leave before 12 a.m. Keep all lights dim. Never use full power. If you hear humming from the vents, ignore it. Do not speak to the woman in the red dress. The mirrors in the west corridor face inward for a reason. Do not adjust them. If a phone rings, do not answer. Do not enter room 217, even if it's unlocked. If you find a photograph of yourself, burn it. Lock the main doors behind you when you leave, even if someone calls your name. I laughed out loud when I read them. It felt like a prank, something Keller gave the new guy to test his nerve. But when I looked up at that sprawling, decaying building, something about the empty windows made me swallow the laugh back down. The first night smelled like dust and copper. My flashlight beam caught shapes that shouldn't have existed. Armchairs with sheet ghost shrouds, wilted ferns frozen in gray. I pushed my cart down the lobby's cracked tile floor, trying not to imagine what the stains were that still darkened the grout. I kept thinking about the rules. Why specify a time? Why dim light? Maybe they didn't want the place to be seen from the highway. That made sense, sort of. Still, the silence pressed hard. I turned on a small radio I'd brought, static filling the air like a blanket of noise. It helped, until the static began to hum. A low, steady vibration pulsed through the vents. My first thought was a generator. Then I remembered Rule 3. I turned the dial to 0. The hum didn't stop. It sounded closer now, as if the air ducts themselves were singing. I shoved my headphones in, cranked up a song, and scrubbed the counter harder than it needed. The humming faded only when I switched off my flashlight. I returned the next night, against my better judgment. The money was too good. When I walked in, though, the air smelled different, sharp, like roses and rust. The lobby's chandelier, long shattered, glittered faintly. Moonlight hit the floor in perfect squares. And at the end of the hall by the grand staircase, someone stood watching me. She wore a red dress. Not bright red, more like dried blood. Her hair hung wet across her shoulders, and when she tilted her head, I saw her eyes glint under the light. Rule 4 screamed in my mind, do not speak to the woman in the red dress. So I didn't. I grabbed my cart and rolled it toward the east wing, pretending she wasn't there. But the sound of heels clicking followed me. Click, click, click. I quickened my pace. Click, click. Faster now. When I turned the corner, the sound stopped. I looked back. The hallway was empty, except for the faint scent of roses. I cleaned 3 rooms that night, before realizing I'd lost my watch. It must have slipped off when I changed the mop water. I checked my phone. 11:42 p.m. Time to go. I started down the main corridor when I saw a door slightly ajar. Room 217. My stomach dropped. The number glowed faintly in the dark, the brass plate polished like new. I don't know why I reached for the handle. Curiosity, maybe. The knob turned easily. Too easily. A draft of cold air brushed my wrist. I peeked in. The room looked pristine, not dusty like the others. The bed was made tight, the curtains drawn. On the dresser sat a silver frame holding a photograph. It was me, standing in the lobby, looking terrified. My fingers trembled. Rule 8. If you find a photograph of yourself, burn it. I yanked it out of the frame and shoved it into the trash bag. My lighter flicked, but the flame wouldn't catch. The edges of the photo curled black for a second, then smoothed out again, unburned. That's when I heard the voice. "Why'd you come back?" I spun around. The woman in red stood inside the doorway now. Her eyes were wide, but her smile was wider. Her teeth gleamed like glass shards. "I just clean," I said, before I could stop myself. Her smile faded. The lights flickered once, then again. Every bulb in the room burst, plunging us into darkness. I bolted past her, or tried to. As I ran through the door, her hand brushed my shoulder, freezing me like ice water down my spine. I didn't stop until I hit the lobby. My cart was overturned, supplies everywhere, and the main doors wide open. Outside, the wind howled up the hill. A single note of that same humming vibrated through the glass panes. I forced the doors shut, locked them, and didn't look back. The next morning, Keller called. His voice was flat. "You left early." "I had to," I said. Someone was there, a woman. Silence. "Don't break Rule 4 again," he said. "You might not get to leave next time." The line clicked dead. That evening, I considered quitting. But as I stared at the envelope of cash on my counter, crisp bills, twice my weekly pay, I couldn't. Rent was due, and no one else in town hired night cleaners anymore. So, against all reason, I returned for a third night. When I stepped through the lobby doors, I saw something new taped to the front desk. A single sheet of paper, written in the same faded ink as the first. Revised rules. The woman in the red dress will speak tonight. Do not respond. If she asks for your name, you must not remember it. Room 217 is now yours. Leave the mirrors as you find them. And whatever you do, do not look at the ceiling. I read those words twice, heart pounding. Then I looked up, just a quick glance. Something moved in the rafters. It wasn't the wind. I didn't sleep the whole day after my second shift at the Briarwood. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman in red, standing just beyond the light, waiting for me to break another rule. But Rent doesn't care about ghosts. So I packed my bag, grabbed my flashlight, and went back. The sky was black that night, not a single star showing through the clouds. The kind of darkness that presses down on you, like it knows what you've done. When I reached the top of the hill, I noticed something strange. The hotel lights were already on. That shouldn't have been possible. I'd never touched the main power, and Keller specifically told me to keep the lights dim. But there they were, flickering faintly behind the tall, narrow windows, as if the hotel were breathing. When I unlocked the front doors, the smell hit me first, lemon polish and smoke. Someone had cleaned, recently. The lobby gleamed like it had been scrubbed top to bottom. The dust was gone. A chandelier that had shattered on my first night now hung intact above the room, every crystal shimmering faintly gold. I called out, "Mr. Keller?" My voice echoed far too long before it died. Silence. Then a faint hum from the vents. Rule 3. I froze, listening. This time, the hum wasn't mechanical. It was melodic. Almost like a choir, faintly singing through the ducts. I couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm. It sounded like breathing. My phone screen lit up suddenly. One new voicemail. Unknown number. "You're late," a woman's voice said. "The rooms don't like waiting." Click. I didn't even remember giving Keller my number. I started my rounds fast, trying not to think. The east hallway stretched longer than I remembered. Each step echoed too slowly, like the floor was delaying the sound on purpose. And the mirrors, the ones facing inward along the west corridor, seemed to shimmer faintly. I caught my reflection once and nearly dropped my mop. It wasn't me. The man in the glass wore my clothes, but his eyes were black. Not dark, black, and he was smiling. I turned the mirror toward the wall, breaking Rule 5 without thinking. The moment I did, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Something laughed down the hallway. Not loudly, just enough to make the air shiver. I left the mirror exactly where it was and didn't look again. By 10:30, I reached room 217. The number plate was gone, but I didn't need it. I knew the door by the scratches along the frame. My mop bucket rolled a few inches forward on its own, as if nudged. A note had been slid under the door. My name written in red ink. You left a mess. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knelt and picked up the paper, and felt a pulse beneath the floorboards. Just once, like a heartbeat deep in the wood. Then, the humming stopped. For the first time since I'd started, the hotel went completely silent. That's when the lights flickered again, one by one, in sequence, moving from the far end of the corridor toward me. Click, 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 like footsteps made of light. I didn't move, couldn't, and then I saw her again, the woman in red, standing at the end of the hall. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dying light. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, shapes moved. Dozens of them. Silhouettes of people in old uniforms, bellhop hats, maid dresses, kitchen whites. The lost staff. They didn't walk. They drifted. And all at once, they turned their heads toward me. I ran. I don't even remember deciding to, but my legs carried me. My boots slammed the tile so hard it echoed like thunder. The humming came back, louder now, roaring through the vents like a storm. When I reached the lobby, something stopped me cold. The front doors were gone. Where the entryway should have been, there was only wall. The same cracked wallpaper, the same faded pattern. I clawed at it, half sobbing, half praying. Then I heard a voice behind me. You didn't finish.
Cleaning. I turned slowly. The woman in red stood in the center of the lobby. Her dress shimmered faintly, like it was made of water, and her feet hovered an inch above the floor. In her hands, she held a feather duster. She smiled. You left fingerprints. I backed away, but she moved closer, without stepping. The air grew heavy, thick with perfume and heat. Do you know what happens to cleaners who don't follow the rules? She whispered. I shook my head. She leaned closer, her lips almost touching my ear. They stay. The lights exploded. Every bulb shattered at once. Something screamed, a dozen voices in unison, rising from every floor, every room, every wall. And then, silence again. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. I was lying on the hotel's front steps, covered in dust. The doors stood open behind me, the interior dark as pitch. My car keys were in my hand. I had no memory of leaving. On the railing next to me sat another envelope. My week's pay and a new note. Good work. The hotel appreciates your service. Return tomorrow at 9 p.m. sharp. We'll keep it ready for you. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting wasn't Keller's. The letters were thin and perfect, written in red. That night, I drove to Keller's office instead of the hotel. The address on his business card led to a small insurance building downtown. I asked the receptionist if he was in. She frowned. Keller? No one by that name works here. Not since the fire. What fire?
I asked. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. The Briarwood fire, back in '93. I left without saying another word. When I got home, I found something waiting on my kitchen counter. A small metal tag. Brass. Room 217. It wasn't there when I left that morning, but it looked freshly polished, like someone had just taken it off the door. I tried to throw it away. I swear I did. But when I woke up the next morning, it was back, resting neatly on my nightstand. And last night, my phone buzzed again. No caller ID. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. A familiar woman's voice whispered through static. "You left the mirrors wrong." Then she laughed, soft, delighted, and the call cut out. Now, it's almost 8:45. The hill is visible through my window, silhouetted against the dark sky. And even from here, I can see the windows of the Briarwood flickering one by one, like they're waiting for me to arrive. The rules said not to come before 9. So I'm writing this down, hoping someone finds it if I don't come back. If you ever see the lights on in that hotel, if you ever hear someone humming through the vents, don't go in, no matter what they promise you, because the Briarwood doesn't need cleaners, it needs keepers. The third night, I knew I wasn't cleaning anything. I was being tested. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not that anyone would have cared much. I told myself I'd only stop by to leave the keys and the note Keller left on my counter. But somehow, my car turned itself toward that familiar road up the hill. Like the hotel, tugging at me through the steering wheel. The lights in the Briarwood were already on again. Every window glowed like a watching eye. I stood at the front steps, staring at the double doors. Someone had cleaned the brass handles. They gleamed under the porch light, waiting for my fingerprints. I told myself to walk away, just turn back, but I couldn't. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the room 217 tag. It felt heavier than metal should, and when I held it tight, the hum started again. Deep, pulsing, rhythmic. The doors opened on their own. The lobby was no longer the crumbling ruin I remembered. It was alive. Candlelight flickered on polished marble floors. The chandeliers sparkled like new. The scent of roses, faint, distant, but everywhere. The sound of soft music drifted through the air. A piano, slow and deliberate, playing an old tune I couldn't quite place. And behind the front desk, a man stood waiting. He wore a dark suit, crisp and spotless, his gray hair slicked back neatly, a small pin glinting on his lapel, shaped like a key. It was Keller, except it wasn't. The skin around his eyes was pale and translucent, like wax. And when he smiled, I saw the faintest glint of light behind his teeth. "You came back," he said, his voice calm and even. "I wasn't sure you would." I didn't answer. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that. "Good. That means you're ready." He gestured for me to follow him through a side door behind the desk. The hallway beyond looked wrong. It shouldn't have been there. It sloped downward, deeper into the hill, carved into the earth itself. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To see what you've been cleaning for," Keller said. "You've earned the truth." The lights flickered as we walked. The air grew colder, the smell of roses turning metallic, like old blood and rusted water. We descended at least 3 floors before the hall opened into a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with mirrors, hundreds of them, tall, narrow, facing inward toward the center of the room. And in the middle, a figure stood, still as a statue, wearing a red dress. It was her, the woman from the hallway. But now, she looked hollow, like a reflection stretched too thin. Her eyes shimmered faintly, and her skin rippled, as if something beneath it was trying to breathe. Keller stopped a few feet away from her. "She's the reason for the rules," he said softly. "The Briarwood's caretaker." "She tried to kill me," I said, my voice shaking. He smiled. "No, she tried to keep you. You see, this place, it doesn't like to be empty. Every so often, it reaches out. It finds someone who can maintain it, someone willing to work." I stared at him. "You're saying the hotel's alive?" He shook his head. "Alive isn't the right word. Awake, maybe. Hungry, always. And the woman in red, she feeds it." He stepped closer to the mirrors, his reflection fracturing across their surfaces. "Do you know what happens to buildings left abandoned too long?" he asked. "They decay, they rot. But sometimes they remember. Every laugh, every scream, every prayer whispered in their walls. They remember. And the Briarwood remembers everything." He looked back at me, his eyes gleaming faintly gold. "Your job was to keep it from forgetting." "I just cleaned," I whispered. "Yes," he said. "You wiped dust from the dead. You mopped floors soaked in echoes. Every stroke polished away the decay and fed the memory beneath." He motioned toward the woman in red. She was the first. Caretaker. 1993. The night of the boiler explosion. My stomach twisted. "She died in the fire?" He nodded. "Her name was Evelyn. She worked the front desk. She stayed behind that night, trying to guide guests out through the smoke. When the explosion hit, it buried her under the east wing. The owners rebuilt around her grave." I looked at her again. The faint hum in the room matched the rise and fall of her chest, as if the entire building breathed through her. "So she's trapped here?" "She's merged," Keller said, "bound to the Briarwood, and every caretaker since then, every cleaner, every keeper, is chosen by her." He turned his gaze on me. "That's what you've been feeling, the pull." I took a step back. "You said the rules were to keep me safe." "They were," Keller said. "You just didn't follow them all. You looked into the mirrors. You spoke to her. You remembered your name." My hands trembled. "What happens now?" He exhaled slowly. "Now, you make a choice." He reached into his jacket and pulled out two things: a key, old and iron black, and a small photograph. It was me, again. Only this time, I was standing behind the front desk, wearing Keller's suit. "This place doesn't let go easily," he said. "It wants a caretaker who stays. The hotel's memory fades, and it needs new hands. I've served my term. It's time for another." I shook my head. "No, I didn't agree to this." "None of us did," Keller said gently. "But the Briarwood doesn't care about choice. It only understands need. You were chosen because you stayed past midnight, because you saw her, and because," he smiled faintly, "you came back." I turned to run, but the hallway was gone. The mirrors now formed a circle around me, stretching endlessly. My reflection stared back hundreds of times, each version moving a second too late. "Stop fighting," Keller's voice echoed, though he was no longer there. "It'll only hurt more." The reflections started changing. In some, I was older, in others, gone entirely. In one, I wore the same black suit and key pin. The humming grew deafening. The woman in red lifted her head, her eyes glowing like embers. "Clean it," she whispered. "Keep it." The mirrors cracked, one by one, and something like smoke poured from them, crawling along the floor and up my legs. My skin burned, but not from heat, from memory. Images flashed behind my eyes. The fire, the screams, the smell of oil and roses. I saw Keller as a young man, pulling bodies from the rubble. I saw Evelyn,
trapped beneath the fallen ceiling, reaching for help that never came. And I saw myself, walking through the doors night after night, ignoring every instinct to leave. The smoke filled my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I reached out for her, for anyone, and everything went dark. When I woke, I was behind the front desk. The chandelier glowed above. The air smelled clean, new. A faint humming filled the vents again. I looked down. The brass nameplate read, M. Doyle, Manager. My reflection in the glass counter smiled back at me, though I hadn't moved. Footsteps echoed across the lobby. Someone had entered. A man in a janitor's uniform pushed through the front doors, glancing around nervously. He carried a mop bucket, a folded list in his hand. He looked young, confused, exactly like I had on my first night. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words weren't my own. "Welcome to the Briarwood," I said, my voice smooth, practiced. "Your supplies are already inside. Just follow the rules." I slid an envelope across the desk. He looked down at it. "Rules?" I smiled. "Yes, read them carefully." He left for the East Wing. I watched him go until the humming began again, low and rhythmic. The woman in red appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes faintly glowing. She met my gaze, and for the first time, I understood her smile. We weren't keepers. We were anchors. Each of us, a weight to keep the Briarwood from collapsing into whatever waited beyond those mirrors. The hotel didn't just remember the dead. It kept them, feeding off their memories to keep itself real. And now, it was my turn. The nights pass quickly now. The mirrors are steady. The humming is constant. Sometimes, I think I hear Keller's voice in the vents, humming along. Sometimes, the lights flicker near room 217, and I catch a glimpse of Evelyn passing through the door. And every so often, a new cleaner arrives. Nervous, tired, desperate for work. I greet them with a smile. I tell them the job is easy. Just a few hours a night. Good pay. I never warn them about the rules until it's too late. Because the Briarwood always needs someone new to remember. Someone to keep it clean. And when the night's over, I always lock the doors behind them, even when I hear their names echoing from the halls.